You know what's fun? Murder. You know what's even more fun than that, however? Murdering your friends and saying it was someone else who actually did it and getting away with it just so you can murder somebody else. That's essentially Project Winter for you. A much more detailed deception-based game compared to Among Us or Town of Salem. Now you may be so caught up in the killings of your friends and the random people screaming the N-word over the microphone that you might have missed some details about the game. Details pointing out to a much larger storyline and picture. Now let me go ahead and place a big old disclaimer. Details regarding certain things in this game are scant, either due to the unique art style leading to different interpretations of what things could be, or image qualities being much too small to clearly make out some finer details. Like, look at all these papers on the ground. Like, Christ, I can barely even make it out. Like, fucking hell. Like, what? Some other gripes I have regarding the possible storyline in this game is how the developer team mentions it's all based around the community's interpretation, but they still go ahead and confirm things all willy-nilly, even if it doesn't make sense. So is the story based around the community, or are you just allowing the community to discuss it and then agreeing with it when it comes up because there's already a story in place? Could we get somebody to ask? Could we do that? Get somebody to ask what the hell is going on? No? Fuck. Despite all these complications, however, I've come up with a clear and precise storyline that fits this game way too well to just be pure happenstance. So, happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, beautiful Boxing Day, and a cool Kwanzaa for all those tuning in for an obligatory holiday video. This is the best I could come up with. Now, if you've ever been in a grade 3 English class, you know the 5 W's. Who, what, where, when, and most importantly, why. Project Winter currently has 11 base game mode roles and an additional 6 if we throw in the Blackout DLC. Despite the heavy cast here, only 3 roles are really important. The Traitors, the Innocents, and the Defector. I'm grouping all the Traitor and Innocent roles here together because although some roles such as a Scientist or Soldier stand out a bit more, it doesn't matter all that much. The Defector, however, is different. It's the only other role that has symbols appearing to it specifically, being both the airdrops and this cave symbol here. The significance will be explained later on in this video. What is the catalyst, the cause, the source, the secret sauce even? What are we doing here? This thing is called the Alien Artifact. It appears in the Blackout DLC. Some more cave drawings show it crashing down and causing some hooby-scooby magic stuff to occur in the local area, causing everybody to get really riled up and flock to its location. Once again, explained later on. Let me just go through the checklist here. Snow, moose, polar bear, alright. Hockey players with maple syrup eating pea meal bacon inside an igloo, sipping on a double Timmy's, rolling up the rim to win, texting other blackberries. Yeah, this is Canada, alright. Specifically somewhere in the Northwest Territories, according to the license plate of the Arctic Cargo. If I were to guess where in the Northwest Territories exactly, however, it would have to be somewhere near the coastline due to the presence of submarines and ships. Or on Victoria Island, maybe. Perhaps even down the Mackenzie River a tad bit. Also, before some buffoon comments there is no way a submarine could dive in a river, the Battle of the St. Lawrence was a World War II U-boat naval battle that occurred in the Gulf of the St. Lawrence, which has a maximum depth of 330 meters. The Mackenzie River has a maximum depth of 610. Christ, this one's going to be complicated to explain. According to the developer team, the game has 4 distinct eras in which everything takes place in. Out of the 4, only one has ever been truly figured out. I'm extremely confident in 2 of the unexplained ones, but I'm iffy in regards to the last one. I'll be explaining them in more depth later on, but in this timeline we have the following eras. The Druid Era, the Cold War Era, Present Day, and Blackout. The Druid Era is in the distant past and is the one confirmed. The Cold War Era specifically occurred around 1967. The present day, or what we play in, is around 1988. And then there's Blackout, which is mostly defunct and separated from this timeline. But if I were to place it somewhere, I'd go somewhere over here. I'm gonna be honest, I really did not spend a whole lot of time researching Blackout. It's very separated and off-brand from the main base game. More like, why did I spend a week without sleep trying to figure this stuff out? Got him. I mean me. Anyways, the question of the why will be answered at the end, when this will all hopefully make sense. I mean, that's why I kind of clicked on this, right? To get answers. I mean, it could be a bit lame if I just told you everything in the first 5 minutes, right? Instead of explaining and building it up and then you know, piecing it a little bit by bit and then coming to the same conclusion. Let's go ahead and place the eras and their evidence in chronological order, starting off with the Druid Era. Now, in a historical sense, the word druid refers to a high-ranking member of a Celtic society, someone like a shaman or a priest. They use their divine powers to typically heal people, make decisions within the group, record and tell stories with everybody else, keep the lore going on, refill the water cooler when it got empty, typical office work stuff. Now, the Celts didn't really come to Canada until the 19th century, now more appropriately known as the Irish, Scots, and the Brits. The word druid, however, has since evolved to be more centered around the mystic and magical powers regarding nature, or something. Never played D&D, G&G, C&D, me, never heard of it, don't know a damn thing. The main piece of evidence regarding the druid's existence is this cave painting here. We see several people witnessing something crash and shortly thereafter worshipping it. All these paintings are centered around this strange rock with some markings on it. The same types of rocks can be found scattered around, most prominently in the Druid's Grove, and some quote-unquote magical ones appear in Necropolis in the Blackout DLC. These stones seem to have a connection to the dead, given what a necropolis actually means, perhaps explaining why ghosts exist within this game. Now, the crashed object in question appears to be the alien artifact, also found within Blackout. There's a lot of inscriptions written in a unique language on it and the surrounding area. Of course, I'm not a linguist, nor do I fully understand the writings on it. Like Christ, people, I can barely read off this script. I'm the same guy who pronounced asbestos as abestos. In essence, however, the writings detail a group of people who are now apparently trapped within some sort of time loop due to a broken chronometric. It's a tool that measures time. And it mentions how they were betrayed, with only one member surviving. There's way too much room to interpret from this, however, and I've yet to find any concrete evidence that can back up anything. I'll probably return to what all this stuff means in the future, but what matters most is this. The Druids were eventually betrayed by someone or thing, with only either one of their own members surviving or one betrayer surviving. They were eventually locked inside a dimension Blackout is set in. I would presume this to be the Defector, or the original Defector at the least. Of course, we now run to the issue of how on earth do I know who's actually trapped inside this dimension. It could be the Druids, Marco Polo, Joseph Stalin, Copernicus, the two Fort Cows, the 14th Canadian Prime Minister Lester Pearson, your third cousin twice removed who insists on spending more time together after they realize you broke up with your cute girlfriend and is probably just looking to use you to get to her, but you don't know each other that well, so maybe he's maybe a cool guy, but like you don't even know what he does for a living. It's probably not that last one, but still, I have no evidence that can say for sure who's in this dimension. The actual location name of the alien artifact, however, is the Eye of Hyperion. Hyperion was the Greek titan, not god, titan, learn your mythology, of divine light and watchfulness, and was the one who set the patterns of the day. His three kids were Eos, Helios, and Selene, the gods of dawn, the sun, and the moon, respectively. Eos really got the short end of the stick here, didn't he? The fact that the artifact, or eye, is destroyed in addition to the name confirms that time is certainly out of whack, and could be a possible explanation for all the eclipses in the game. Now, when I started this script and research, I really wanted to avoid talking about Blackout, just because it's sort of derailed from the main game to a certain extent, and really I haven't barred the research in its entirety, being DLC and all. Luckily, it seems to just be an add-on rather than an expansion to the current base game lore, so it doesn't really conflict with anything else I'm going to say in this video. This right here is the real meat and potatoes. A little bit of corn on the side with a buttered roll, maybe turnips if you're into that. The big holiday feast. Listen, I have to remind you some way that this was a holiday video, alright? Anyways, if you ever played a Mantra Project Winter, you know that there are bunkers. You may have also noticed several other unique features of the land while walking around. Stuff like a crashed submarine and a crashed plane with some spooky skeletons scattered in the surrounding surface area. What does this all mean, though? Ignore how I already said the answer in the intro. It's called thematic suspense. The video would be a bit boring without a little bit of it. All of this dilapidated and destroyed equipment appears to stem from the Cold War. The Cold War wasn't really a war, but more so the threat of one due to the uneasy tension between most NATO members and the USSR and the usage of nuclear weapons. It started following World War II in 1947 and ended officially in 1991 when the Soviet Union fell. The ever-constant threat of a nuclear bombardment had everyone worried, and as a result, the United States and Canada teamed up to fight against the USSR in 1940. Preparing for the worst, the two made plenty of bunkers in case things went poorly. Most famously are the Canadian Diefenbunkers, named after the Prime Minister at the time, John Diefenbaker.
Yeah, okay, but why are there bunkers in the literal middle of nowhere?
That's my impression of you nerd. You see, the quickest way the Soviets could attack is from the north, crossing the North Pole. As a result, to counter this possible quick offense, the US and Canada teamed up and made something called DO. Not that kind of DO. Not that one either. Bingo, there you go. DO stands for Distant Early Warning. They were originally constructed in 1957, but became eventually abandoned for the most part in 1988. These DO stations were a system of radio stations set up along the northern coast and allowed the Allied countries to detect any incoming Soviet bombers, subs, and land-based threats planning to invade. Speaking of bombers, we have this crashed plane. This plane looks identical to a B-29 Super Fortress bomber, an infamous World War II bomber plane, being the plane that dropped the atomic bombs on both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Both have the same cockpit and the same amount of propellers in the same spots. The issue with that is that the B-29 bomber was retired by the United States in 1965, 2 years before my proposed date of when all this stuff showed up. That's why this plane isn't a B-29 bomber at all. Actual idiots, use your eyes! It's very clearly the much superior Tupolev TU. Show him the plane. Show him the plane. Hey, show him. Bring it out. Roll him out. Roll out the plane. Fucking idiots. Couldn't even tell the super obvious and noticeable differences. Like the fact that this plane actually weighs 340 kilograms more than that one. You see, back in 1944, 4 American B-29 bombers crashed in Russia. And Russia may have stolen their designs exactly so they could create their own bomber planes. But then again, can you really blame them? It's a nice looking plane. These Soviet planes were in military operation and usage until the mid-1960s. And shockingly enough, this Soviet plane was the first to drop a Russian nuclear device, which is interesting to think about when you see its debris. I personally don't think that this plane we see in Project Winter, however, was carrying any sort of nuclear payload at all. The theorized time period for all this equipment showing up is 1967, which doesn't really scream mid-1960s to me. Interestingly enough, however, Tupolev TUs were instead being used as transports, or as airborne laboratories until the mid-70s. We'll have to return to that laboratory statement later on. I want to quickly talk about the submarine. I hate it. If I had a nickel for every time I had insanity related to a fictional video game submarine, I'd have 2 nickels. It isn't a lot, but it's weird it's happened twice. So, I see the submarine, and I see people talking about how it's a Delta IV class Russian sub with the name K-84 Ekaterinburg. I quickly notice how this sub doesn't line up with this sub because the hydroplanes here aren't seen here. Following that was a long, sad, and cruel battle with my own wits, several wikis, and the secrets of the sea. Unfortunately, my sanity didn't walk out of that fight, but fortunately, thanks to Discord user IandDog, who asked some submarine suckers on the r/submarines, we received an answer. It isn't real. That being said, it's most likely heavily inspired from the K-84, however, so fuck you. I'm gonna briefly talk about that sub and why it's here, because I'm really starting to hate submarines. Anyways, the K-84 was constructed in 1985, and its reason for creation was to attack military and industrial buildings in the case of a nuclear war. Also interesting is Operation Behemoth, a Soviet military operation and exercise that marked the first successful time a sub launched all its ballistic missiles at once. Such a feat was carried out by the Ekaterinburg in December 1989. Obviously, the real-world counterpart to this sub stretches the timeline a tad bit, but it can still fit comfortably in the timeline I have proposed here. Now let's backtrack to that lab for a bit. Now, for those that are mentally inclined, labs are not just a breed of dog, but also where people research and do scientific stuff. Now, obviously, you'll ask yourself, just what exactly are they researching? And the answer to that is the alien artifact. The nuclear power station has a blackboard with a variety of equations on it that shed some more light on the specifics and what may truly be going on inside the lab regarding the alien artifact. Now, the blackboard is a true eyesore to read, and I apologize for that since it impacts what I can talk here. And boy oh boy, if you thought the video was boring before this point, I have terrible news for you. I will be blunt. This next section is boring as fuck. The equivalent to this would be 5 minutes before the bell rings in your high school calculus class. So you've been warned. With that out of the way, let's talk about math. Yay. Two equations that show up on the blackboard here are Colombo's law and Newton's law of universal gravitation. These both probably refer to the alien artifact's ability to float and not be affected by gravity to a certain extent, in addition to their magnetic attraction/repulsion respectively. The sine wave is interesting as it denotes that the alien artifact is constantly and regularly producing a steady outburst of something over time, although I can only make a stab in the dark on what the output actually is. Solving the algebraic equation below yields the number 8, which is the maximum amount of players one could have in a match. Not sure if it has any significance outside of that, however. At the very top of the blackboard, we have another equation referring to the future value of something equaling the present value of the same item multiplied by the product of the brackets. Simple bedness, people, come on. Christ, I'm feeling like my old math teacher. Not sure what the D could be representing here, but the N is surely a measurement of time. Minutes, days, schmeckens, years, decades, I'm not quite sure. Whatever the current value is, however, the future value will apparently be less. To the left of that equation, we have T equals TC plus TN. T standing for total, and I'm assuming once more that TC and TN stands for total carbon and total nitrogen respectively. Stuff closely tied to organic life and decomposition. Hopefully, I shouldn't have to explain why carbon is such a big deal. It's essentially the chemical compound building block for literally everything in the known universe. Near the bottom of the sine wave, we have a barely readable chemical equation. It's nearly impossible to make out, however I believe we can see a T being a reactant to some incredibly small other compound, which in turn is a reactant to a certain amount of hydrogen and carbon compounds. I want to say 4, but that's a massive strain on my poor old sleep-needed eyes. Either way, this feels like more evidence of a biological component being related to the properties of the alien artifact. Right beside the sine wave and above the circles, we have a nice, simple, basic algebraic expression. That is probably the only time you will ever hear somebody call algebra basic and simple. Anyways, x equals 3 in this equation, and the answer being 42 raises some interesting connections. 42 is the answer to the meaning of life, the universe, and everything. And 3 is a fairly common superstitious number, which has way too many connections that I don't want to go into. And finally, we have this circle diagram. This is the only thing I couldn't really figure out that is visible. At first, I thought it was a Bohr diagram detailing the element the alien artifact could be, but of course there are no elements that have 3 valence rings but only 1 electron on it. If you have zero idea what I just said, don't worry about it. Doesn't matter. Have fun on the chemistry exam. The more I looked at this, however, the more it seemed to be a heliocentric diagram of the solar system, or at least the first 3 planets in the moon. The Sun being the ball in the middle, the first ring and dot being Mercury, the second Venus, and the final one being Earth and the Moon. I'm fairly certain it's a diagram of the solar system, but I still have some doubts, like why Mars was excluded. And I don't really have the patience to watch a model of the planet circling the Sun in the 60s to see if it properly lines up. That being said, I'm still going to assume it's a model of the solar system, and the possible line coming out of the Earth to be the trajectory of the alien artifact. Without anything else to base it off of, however, I can't even guess where it may have been originally. Anyways, class is done for the day. Homework is to figure out what this circle is for sure, make a working and accurate model of the solar system in the 60s to see if it lines up too for an instant A+, and pass on the final exam, and maybe even a pizza party afterwards. Taking the biological info received from the blackboard here and attaching it to what actually goes inside the lab building is interesting to say it kindly, and a loose connection to say it harshly. The lab in Project Winter contains Truth Serum and the Lazarus Machine, both of which are colorized by a light blue akin to the fires commonly seen around quote-unquote inactive Druid rocks, implying impossible connection. Truth Serum is something that the United States have been trying to achieve since 1947, with several failed attempts. The longest and most recent one, however, which also gained the most amount of publicity, was MK Ultra, which attempted to have interrogated prisoners be subjugated to drugs to force a confession from them. The program started in 1953 and was officially stopped in 1973. It was tested and used upon a large crowd of people ranging from prisoners, soldiers, and ordinary public citizens, all unwillingly and without consent. The Truth Serum in-game appears to be a possible perfected form of the MK Ultra program, or maybe even a different Truth Serum drug. The Lazarus Machine is the other object to be noteworthy in the lab. Bringing a raw human heart to it as a scientist allows you to resurrect a dead player. The name alone is a reference to the Holy Bible, and the person named Lazarus, who was revived from death by Jesus. Sadly, however, there isn't any real connection to the Lazarus Machine and the rest of Project Winter. I'll discuss some more details regarding this, but we spent way too much time in this area of the game, and I really need to move on to this section. Now, to be honest, the usage of the word present day is a tad bit misleading, since I'm fairly certain that the game takes place roughly around the year 1989. Evidence for this being the Beetle escape being a perfect model of the Osprey. Not that Osprey. There you go. An American-only military transport vehicle which first took to the skies in 1989. Of course, this opens up a lot of questions, like why on earth are the players actually here in the Northwest Territories to start off with? Everyone hopefully understands that a mega blizzard is the need and reason for an evacuation, but why on earth are we in hell frozen over? Recall Dew, the now mostly abandoned and defunct radio stations? Well, the reason why those stations were abandoned to start off with is due to how little attention they received in terms of funding, eventually causing Dew to be replaced with a new system called NWS, or the North Warning System in 1988, refurbishing the old abandoned Dew centers with new technology. Side note, the Dew centers also had a permanent effect on the surrounding area, disturbing local wildlife, causing a heavily reduced number in caribou and fish, having an effect on the local native population, and in certain cases, allowing certain chemicals to contaminate the soil. If we take a brief look at that poster beside the blackboard, it certainly looks like radioactive materials being allowed to leak into the groundwater there. It would appear that the innocents are nothing more than mere garbage men. But what about the traitors? And what's the deal with all the traitor logos being plastered around everywhere, even on all the escape vehicles? Now, when people think of the traitors and innocents and how they fit together in the story, they always envision something like this. Now, I'm gonna do something that's gonna blow your fucking mind. The traitors and survivors are part of the same group. That's the sound of your mind exploding from the news I just told you. I did warn you, to be fair. The traitors appear to be higher-ranking officials compared to those innocents, but the two work for the same group. This explains why all the redacted papers tossed around have the traitor symbol on them, why the innocents call the escape vehicles despite them also having the symbol, why the bunkers have the traitor symbol on them, but the crates inside and consoles outside having the survivor symbol on them. In case of a nuclear threat, you want the higher-ranking officials safe and sound. If we backtrack to MK Ultra, an order in 1973 was issued to destroy any and all information relating to it. Now, an itsy-beansy small amount of documents survived this order, however. 20,000 documents survived this, all being uncovered in 1977. Now, these destroyed articles and papers specifically refer to Project MK Ultra, not Project Winter. In a joint collaboration to prevent a Soviet invasion, the United States and Canadian government teamed up to create DEW, a series of radio outposts to detect incoming Soviet invasions. The radio outpost is a simple front, however, as the main point of the station was to perfect and create a working Truth Serum and discover the military potential of the alien artifact, codenamed Project Winter. For use of testing themselves or possible captured Russians, some side effects occurred, resulting in the deaths of certain individuals. People died or left until the project was eventually abandoned in the mid-60s. Until a public Senate hearing regarding Project MK Ultra is announced, shedding some light on the government's illegal use of human experimentation. In an effort to cover their tracks further, they used a WNS cleanup and reformatting of the old DEW bases as a front to ensure the truth about Project Winter doesn't escape. For my usual format, let's talk about some flaws of this theory. Can I even call this a theory? Like everything lines up a bit too well to just be pure coincidence, you know? We're calling it a fairy still? Alright. Alright. Okay. Alright. Anyways, we have the first problem being the defector. The defector has a bit more story related to it, but I'm not quite sure how I can concretely prove the connection. I theorize that the sole surviving member from the decoded alien artifact is the defector, and this cave painting here shows some more interesting stuff in regards to the role. Shouldn't say the defector conflicts with anything I said here, I just don't know enough about him to tell anyone else anything. Second thing we have is Blackout. Didn't really discuss it all that much here, but once again it doesn't conflict with anything, but just adds on to it, which is quite nice. And the last issue we seem to have is... oh, brother. 5 Survivors Fury. This Fury makes 0 sense to me. I mean, I get the basis for it. There were 5 people who survived the plane crash, and one of them was Russian, and then they somehow wound up at the abandoned research site. But the evidence for this is one of the worst things I've ever seen. It can so easily be disputed by just using your eyes. The survivors of this supposed plane crash came out of this one, the Tupolev T4 from the 4. Except that the plane that everyone claims that they crashed from is a B-36, which looks nothing like this one at all. I mean, the cockpit is completely missing from here, there are 6 propellers and they all face backwards. Like, how did people think this plane was the same as this plane? What makes this Fury even worse is that they try to say that this plane crash is a real-world plane crash what happened in 1950. The crash itself happened in British Columbia, not the Northwest Territories. What makes this worse, however, is that the crash is actually closer to Alaska than it is to the Northwest Territories too. So there's no way in hell that 5 people survive a plane crash and somehow trekked this distance in Canada in the middle of the winter. Out of the 17 crew members on the plane, 12 were rescued after the crash and 5 were presumed dead, although one apparently resurfaced 4 years later after the crash alive. So the theory is that a plane somehow crashed in British Columbia, but the wreckage somehow teleported to the Northwest Territories, and the 5 crewmates not picked up by the people we see in the progression tab of the game, and they just happen to come all across this stuff. Listen, if your theory and evidence can be as easily as debunked by looking at an image or reading the title, it probably isn't good evidence. And there we have it. The obligatory holiday video that everyone needs to have to remain relevant, apparently. Before I sign this video off, however, I'm proud to announce that we somehow reached 1,000 subscribers, probably thanks to this terrible audio.
It's not alive.
Christ, making some noise indeed. At least the next Iceberg video will be better. For those whose eardrums weren't blown away by that, I thank you for joining me, and for those that haven't, I mean, do whatever you want, really. I don't like pandering to people for subs and likes and such, but I'm thankful to those that do. I probably wouldn't continue to make these kind of videos if they didn't get a little bit of attention due to how much effort goes into researching the topics, so I really do appreciate it. So, once more, Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, beautiful Boxing Day, and a cool Kwanzaa for all those tuning in, and thanks to everyone for this opportunity. See ya!